So we're only supposed to start in about 6 minutes time, so let's give it a couple more minutes.
So who wrote down the Wi-Fi course? Who wrote it down? Yeah.
I did it. Oh. Should I get someone to bring it for you guys? You shouldn't really need Wi-Fi in this session though. Yeah. Unless it's really that boring, so let's see what I can do.
I like the box.
So it's being organized. So just finish a second. We see themselves here as developers. Okay? And sort of technical. And Scrum Master, Agile Coach, Team Coach type of people. Okay? I think you guys specifically will get a lot of value out of this session. Product owners, any? 2. Fantastic. We'll start the revolution.
We can build 14 from this room.
Cool.
All 5.
Yeah, well, 4 maybe. Yeah, maybe 5. Okay. So there's not someone at the time here. I think at conferences there's usually a person like a piece of paper that says you're allowed to start now.
You're allowed to start.
Thanks. There's people coming in. I think I'm cool.
Yeah, it's time to close the lock the door.
Yeah.
So the ones that don't find seats, you can come and facilitate in the front. Well, there's 2 more chairs here. John, I'll tell you there's the Wi-Fi password. So does anyone watch saying off boss? It's the worst part, like the beginning, the 3 minutes or so before a talk starts, and stuff. Awkward silence. So we've got some stickers here. You guys want to grab some?
I've already got.
It's this logo. Okay. 2 minutes. I think I'm going to get started. So we have about 2 product owners in the room, probably about 5 or 6 sort of Scrum Master, Team Coach, Team Manager, the top people, and then mostly technical people the rest of the session. So out of the session is rescuing legacy software from impending doom. So just to make sure that you're in the right session. And the goal here is to just share some battle stories from the trenches and hopefully back that up with a bit of theory and stuff that some of the big wigs in the industry is saying. And yeah, I hope to have a very interactive session, so hopefully you guys have your chatting shoes on after this morning's keynote. I really like that format. I didn't prepare a game, I'm not that hardcore yet, but next time we'll have a game. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineering coach, which is slightly different from an agile coach. We work with teams across the entire life cycle, in all facets of the software engineering life cycle, and help them become better at software development. So we look processes, obviously, and practices, and just help them build up skills. So we usually walk a very long path with teams along this. So I'm the founder of two companies, In Reality, which focuses on sort of like building custom software and coaching, and then, so that's the naughty row. And then also Dev Guild, which is, it's as the name implies, we're trying to create a community of professionals that learn together from one another, so that people can go to a place and they can learn from other professionals. And it's very much focused around developers. So we're starting to get it rolling in Joburg, and hopefully we'll be able to start bringing it to Cape Town soon as well. Who's here from Cape Town? Jeez. Who's here from Joburg? Okay, like 4 people. So if I talk a bit fast, just like Projan. I actually do talk a bit fast in talks, so especially if there's like 50 or so people doing it, this is something I might show. So the talk is very experimental. I'm going to pose some questions, and then there will be sort of like a little timer that runs out, and that gives you a space in which you can talk to the people around you. When I practiced talk in my head, there was going to be about a room that's about twice the size for about 70 people. Here we have about 50, but the room isn't about twice the size. So I think it's going to get very, very loud when we have conversations. So what we may end up doing is just sort of doing an open participation, put your hand up type of thing, but let's see how it goes. Okay. So as I've said, I need to stop my timer. It's all past. So as I've said, it's about refactoring stories from the trenches, and it's around legacy code. And for us, sort of working with software teams, the process is one aspect of it. You know, how the team sort of organize themselves and manage it themselves is one sort of aspect of things. But then there's other aspects, like, you know, the engineering practices that really, how can I say, enable teams to become a lot more agile. And one of the things that we've seen in many, many organizations is that legacy code absolutely kills agility. Legacy code and the way the code bases are structured slow teams down so much that they actually can't deliver fast, irrespective of how good their processes are. So the focus today is around legacy code and how we fix that legacy code, and the first conversation is going to be to you guys. I think try to have sort of 2 conversations per table, so cut the tables in half, taking the cue from the earlier conversation. Maybe naughty group can just like turn around. So pose the question to you guys: what is legacy code? What does legacy code mean for you, and how do you define it? Go for it. Oh yeah, sorry. There's 5 minutes. 5 minutes per sort of question.
It's called the that also slows down the exactly. Also, normally legacy code does not follow the standard Well, maybe someone who can with the ideas that was adopted, but obvious he's already there. He has been reflected together to that was cost money. It doesn't actually deliver value to the business. And that makes it as well, with the speed of
Cool, thank you. All right, so that went much better than I expected. No arguments, and it wasn't too loud. So I heard some interesting conversations. I'll just highlight some of the things that I've heard as you guys spoke. The one gentleman said that it's brittle code. It's code that we sort of like, it's, if we change it, it may break. Someone else said that it's code that takes a lot more steps to refactor or to do something in when you're working with it. I think you sort of was along those lines. Someone else said, and I heard a couple of tables sort of say that it's any code that's in production. Jacques said you heard one group say that it's code where the people aren't around that wrote it originally. The people aren't around to maintain it. When I did a dry run with my wife, she's also in IT, and she sort of said, well, she thought it's mainframe code, which sort of like so yeah. So Michael Feathers wrote a book on working effectively with legacy code, and he labeled it as legacy code is simply code without tests, which is interesting. But what if the tests are bad? What if those tests are brittle? What if there's a lot of false positives in those tests? So there's a guy called Jerry Rainsberger, and he said legacy code is a valuable code that we're afraid to change, irrespective of whether there are tests or not. And I like that. It summarizes it very neatly for me. So, And the emphasis there is on valuable code and fear. And that's a big theme that we need to just carry throughout the conversation. Now, there are two product owners here, so don't swarm them when we ask the next question, please. But just truthfully, in your environment, do product owners see value in fixing this fear, making this fear go away? Right? And again, 5 minutes for that conversation.
You don't see the value, so it has to be so rather wait for it to break.
So there's a lot of real for that. Oh, we actually broke it down because it's so we broke it down into very the one was part of the one, the second one was storage. According to that, it's the velocity in the previous one, there's been a lot of hurdles but that one it was a little in it, but features because there was a chance that we saw an opportunity get it to if that change with the network. So,
Right, so
Sorry, this is like
yeah, I think we're pretty much there. The conversation went into a bit of a lull about 30 seconds ago anyway, so fantastic. Okay, so do product owners see value in fixing it? And there were some interesting conversations. The conversations were a lot deeper than the previous set, so it was hard for Jock and I to follow all the threads that was going through. But one of the common things that came through is that the product owners always focus on getting that value right now. It's about getting the next set of features out. And there was also this sort of like, if we could allocate time to fix stuff versus allocate time to do the features, product owner would favor doing new features. And sometimes someone said, there's this upper management, these invisible sort of like agents that sit somewhere, like they make these decisions, because management says, So they also seem to sort of say, that the prioritization doesn't happen and we end up not doing this stuff. So there was a lot of conversations around trust, and I want to get into that conversation around trust in about 3 or 4 sort of slides this time, because there's something important around that. So typically product owners say things like, there's not enough time. Right, and we can't afford it. We just can't afford doing this right now. It's more important for our business to get this stuff out the door. Business will close down if we don't do it. Well, we actually had a business that closed down because they couldn't get the stuff out. And there's deep conversation around that, because did they close down because they were slow in the code and therefore they couldn't get stuff out and they closed down, or did they close down because they couldn't get, it becomes a bit of a intertwined mess. And sometimes they say, just one more feature, let's just get this release out and then we'll be fine. So I went to go and speak to a couple of product owners, and it was interesting. Almost all of them said they have never had conversations with developers about this stuff. That's interesting. So what happened? Something happened. What was wrong there? So getting into it a bit further, I realized that the development teams they got sort of like this pressured work that sort of piled up, and then in their head they made a decision that we need to get this stuff out the door because the pressure is up, because business is saying all of these things, and they're hearing don't look at quality. So there's an interesting thing. There's a conversation that isn't happening, and that ties into the trust thing. So we as development teams are just as skilled on this. And I say development teams to include all the role players in that. It's a conversation that has to happen. And I think one of the things that happen with developers is we're not equipped to have those conversations. Not that we're sort of antisocial people. So we don't have the ammunition, the ways of explaining those things. And hopefully throughout the rest of the sort of presentation and like interactions, we'll get to some of those sort of like little messages that we can convey to our product owners more effectively. Okay, so let's start off with understanding what the value is of improving legacy code. Why would we want to improve it? What do we achieve out of improving that? What is the driver? Again, 5 minutes. Is the volume levels working for you guys? Yeah. Okay, perfect. I just realized that I didn't introduce Jock, who's my business partner in crime. So we only decided this morning that he's going to co-facilitate, and that's why we didn't have time to update the slide decks or anything. Cool, so 5 minutes. Why? What's the value of improving legacy code?
Developers just want to shine into it.
What's the advantage of when you're going to have applications ready? You don't need
Remember, I used to coming back from your code, and why was training you with backgrounds and processes become very labor intensive, which possible somebody.
The requirements have changed. What the requirements support both staff. Of course, we need basically it's different departments of the
Thanks. So we ran over a little bit on that one. School So there was a lot of interesting conversations that was had across the room, and most of them didn't align with what my following slide said, so that's also interesting. So someone said shiny toys. You know, developers like playing with new technology, and that excites them. And we want to fix legacy code because it's fun. So that's interesting. Maybe I got the statement wrong, but that's
we
what I.
don't want to fix it. We rather want to play with it.
Oh, okay. And that's what happens if you walk around and just. But luckily, you guys will correct me. So the other one is it's about happy devs. You know, devs don't really like playing around in ASP Classic and VB6. You know, someone said that the aspect of that is around sort of skills acquisition. You know, it's getting people into the company that have those relevant skills. So there's merit in that. I think there's a deeper conversation that we can have around that, and hopefully that aligns to 3 slides from now. And there was a very deep conversation at the back there about, you know, that fixing sort of outweighs like the value of trying to struggle with the old code and building it. You know, it's like this value proposition that's cheaper for us to fix and then build the new stuff than it is for us to try and work on the old code base. A gentleman in front here said that also, you know, we want to make sure that our understanding of the code sort of change, that our understanding of the problems as it is currently is sort of reflected in the code base, and that will allow us to be a bit more nimble. Was that sort of a correct? Yeah. And then the gentleman in the front here spoke about, you know, reversing entropy. So all of those things, you know, start like, but they don't really get to, you know, what the true value is in doing that. So some of the things could have been that it's to do with craftsmanship. You know, we want to be professionals. We want to write clean code, and that is the right thing to do. You know, that's. And some of the things could be, you know, it's around maintainability and extensibility. We want to imbue our comprehension of the problem into the code base, which ties into that as our understanding changes. So Martin Fowler, he actually did a very, very nice talk on refactoring in January. So I definitely encourage you guys to go and watch that, about 20 minutes long. And he spoke about economics. It's about, fundamentally, we want to make sure that the code base costs less to maintain and it costs us less to add new features to that, which gets to that, you know, the trade-off between value and fixing the code base. So I like that, economics. So when we speak to our product owners, we shouldn't speak about craftsmanship and professionalism. We should speak about economics. It's fundamentally, you know, this thing is about money. You know, we're building systems to either make the companies more efficient in their processes or to sort of sell software or services, right? It's about economics. So the act of fixing legacy code, and some people refer to that as refactoring. So when we do refactoring, what is our goal? What is refactoring all about? And then I'll get into, you know, answering that question for you guys. So we get this legacy code base. We understand we have to sort of apply the concept of economics and have a conversation to get the stuff on our product backlog. And now we need to start fixing it. So how do we go about it? What is refactoring? What is it all about? Okay, and again, 5 minutes.
Sorry? What is the why was I?
If you don't implement the code integration, let's say that goes 1 to 6 months, it's totally out of all fine discussed with best practice. You don't understand it. You have to spend a lot of time maybe the indicators that will
something like improving the performance, making something work a bit better. Well, it's open question.
Because I read it.
The same outcome. So if it's processing the effort of developer, so minimizing future development effort. It's a good point. It's a cleanup of code.
And that's a also screws that are just designed for that purpose. So you look at the examples you've got, you come along later on, you say, hey guys, we're going to make a PC with any audio make the changes. He just doesn't before it.
Aha, cool. So, what is refactoring? What is our goal when we try to clean this legacy code, when we try to improve this legacy code? So, a couple of people said it's to improve the maintainability of the code, to make it easier for us to do stuff on the code base in the future. So, to do clean code and all of those type of things. I also had a conversation around comprehension. So, when future developers come along, it's easier for them to understand it. And interesting conversation was that it's about unraveling this mess that a previous developer, you could have been yourself, that a previous developer created, and like trying to get your head around it and just like getting away from that. There was sort of a conversation around what if there was a poor developer and they didn't really understood the implications of what they were doing. So trying to reverse some of those mistakes. And then there were two sort of points around performance, improving performance, and also improving the logic, cleaning up the logic in the code. which to me is a bit of a smell, and I want to get into that in a couple of slides, because that implies not necessarily, okay, I will get into that in a couple of slides, otherwise I'll screw up my presentation. So, Joshua Krevsky, if I pronounce his name correctly, said it's to do with improving the design of the code so that it's easier to work with. He wrote a book called Refactoring to Patterns. And I sort of like this. So we're here to improve the design. We're here to improve the maintainability, to make it easier for people to understand what's going on, and for future generations to have a more pleasant time in this code base. Uncle Bob, says, if you look at a team that's got legacy code, there's like 20 WTFs per minute that's coming out of the room when they're looking at the code, and like legacy code, or code that's sort of like under control, there's only 2 WTFs a minute. So it's about minimizing WTFs a minute. So it's interesting because when we do this, we shouldn't break the code base. So we need to maximize safety. We're improving the design without changing the behavior. This is critical, right? So we can't like refactor and then sort of like put things into production and then things break. And this breaks down a lot of problems that people see or product owners experience with refactoring, because typically when dev teams do refactoring, they're actually going to do rewrites. And you should avoid that, right? It's not about changing the behavior under any circumstances. It's about changing the way the code is laid out, essentially. So, and the way we approach these problems, we need to be very, very careful. We need to sort of like treat this thing as something that can blow up at any time. We need to make sure that we don't break things. Now, Martin Fowler, or Ken Beck, when he spoke about refactoring originally, this is Martin Fowler's Fedora, by the way. He used it in these slides, so I'll just use his Fedora. So he wrote a refactoring book, and that's why his hat is there. Martin Fowler says there's sort of like 2 hats that we wear. We wear a construction hat when we're building new features, we're enhancing existing code, and we're building the refactoring hat when we're improving the design of the code. And we can only wear one of these hats at any given any given stages. So the construction hat is very much about adding behavior to our system, where the refactoring hat is very much about changing the structure of the system, so moving the behavior around into a way that is better organized. So I really like that. It's refactoring, focus on the structural outline of the system, sort of think of classes and methods and sort of dependencies, where construction is very much about what the system does, how it executes things. Okay? Now, there's actually 3 types of instances in which we would do refactoring. There is sort of new code, the construction side of things. There's code changes, which is also a bit of construction. And then there's solution-wide refactorings, which would be like taking a more of a top-down approach to fixing up our code bases. That's especially true, if you have a legacy code base that has been in a bad state for many, many years. We've all got that in our environments, right? Very much all of us. So that, we'll get into the conversation about rewrites as well in that conversation. So with new code, these are sort of like 6 refactoring workflows that you would execute when you work with legacy code. So the first is obviously new code, and that's TDD refactoring. TDD refactoring is, we write a failing test, we make the test pass, and then we refactor the top passing production code into our system. I'm not spending a lot of time on this because we're talking about legacy code, and that's usually, in this space, we're creating legacy code. We're not, we're not working on
We'll talk after this about the drilling knowledge and that.
How to create legacy code.
How to create legacy code. Do TDD wrong. So the next is when we make code changes. And the first is litter pickup refactoring. And Uncle Bob refers to it as the Boy Scout rules. So we get to the campsite and we leave the campsite cleaner than what we found it. So we're picking up litter as we're working within the code base. And that is usually driven by a feature that we need to add, or a feature that we need to modify, or a bug that we need to fix. The second part to that, and there was a lot of conversation on this, is we try to imbue the comprehension of the code into we try to imbue our comprehension into the code base. So what Cunningham explains this very, very nicely. So we're sitting there, we're unraveling the code as we're working with it. And as we're getting through it, we start reaching these eureka moments. Those WTFs start going away. And at the moment, we suddenly understand, oh, this is what the code was doing and what it's supposed to do. And we have this idea in our head. Now that idea is very, very fragile. We could wake up tomorrow and we could have forgotten it. Another problem with that idea is that it's not in anyone else's head. So what we need to do is we need to reflect our understanding into the code. We need to change things around so that the next person that comes along says, oh, okay, well, I totally understand, and there's not a double F that emerges. The third part on code changes is preparatory refactoring. I'm Afrikaans. If you say that a lot of times as Afrikaans person, that's hard. Preparatory refactoring. So that's typically where you have a change that you need to make in the system. You look at the code base and you say, there's no way we can make this change easily. So we need to first clean up the code a little bit, get it restructured in a certain space, and then we can make the change easily. So that's the three sort of workflows. And you can have a look at Martin Fowler's website. He's got like a little explanation on how you actually execute these different workflows. So solution-wide refactoring. I need to get a proper clicker. So solution-wide refactoring is, there's sort of two. The planned refactoring, so we realize there's a mess. We realize we can't clean it up right now. And we're going to speak to the product owner and we say, listen here, we need to clean up this mess. The second one is, we get to the code base and it's a complete disaster. Right? You know, developers have been coding on it for the last 10 years, like all of the code that we've ever touched. Coding on it for the last 20 years or 10 years. And it's like this big silo, and everything is like crazy. There's hard coding everywhere, and we need to start like putting a plan together to get this code into a good state. And that's sort of long-term refactoring, where we have sort of numerous planned refactorings in between it. So Martin Fowler says that no true agile team would ever be in this space. I've yet to meet that team. He says he has met some teams like that. I think at some stage you will always need to have these more top-down experiences. So who's actually not needed this in their environment? I guess you wouldn't be sitting in this, you would be standing here. Okay. Well, we haven't had those experiences yet. So let's talk a little bit about code changes. We like sushi. Most of you. Have you noticed how clean sushi chefs sort of workspace is when they make food? And how efficiently they clean up the workspace when they go along? So Uncle Bob in Clean Code speaks about the sushi chef as they're working and continuously cleaning up the sort of workspace and making sure that the workspace doesn't get messy. So things are always in the places where they belong, and if they're not, they're going to slow down, right? Like things are going to become slower and slower and slower, and the sushi is going to become less and less pristine, and there may be some hygiene questions that start creeping in. So imagine the sushi chef is now quite successful, and the restaurant is like really, really busy. People are queuing around the block to get into this restaurant. And now the sushi chef is starting to sort of cut corners and rushing to get through the work. So the whole time he's looking out the window and saying, look at this amount of crazy people that's like wanting food, right? And imagine that the whole sushi industry starts doing that. You know, they start cutting corners and trying to just get food on people's tables, right? So people would start getting sick and unhappy, and suddenly we would not eat sushi anymore. Okay, so that's where we are as developers. We've been compromising, cleaning up as we go along, not being professionals. And we should have, right? We should have made sure that we kept the quality high. I think about the sushi chef again, you know, the first sushi chef to ever like compromise, cleaning up his workspace as he went along. And imagine he went to somewhere, you're hungry, right? And you want sushi. And I come to you and I say, you know, I could clean up the kitchen while I'm making the sushi for you specifically, so that everyone else has a nice day. But that means you get your meal 20 minutes later. What would you say? You would say, I want my meal right now, yeah? Because I don't really care about the other people. I care about my meal, my needs, right now, immediately. So does the sushi chef ever do that? Do doctors do that? Do other engineers do that?
No.
Do any professionals do that?
No.
Okay, so we need to be professionals. This is not a conversation that you should be having with your product owner. This is something that you should do outright. You shouldn't plan 20% extra time to clean up your code base as you're going along. It's you as developers that is to say, I'm being a professional, I care about what's happening in this code base. So, let's see how we would approach this. Now this type of refactoring is an immense amount of stuff that's been written about it. Most of the refactoring books talk about the code change type of refactoring. There's very few that's been written about the sort of solution-wide refactoring. We'll get into that in the next section. So let's talk about how, now that we've said we're professionals, we're going to update the definition of done. We're never going to be in a situation where we don't try and attempt to clean up our kitchen while we're working with this. So now that we've done that, how would we approach it? How would we approach that little piece of code as we're working with it, and 5 minutes.
No, that's just well, this is
Well, remember it's going to be difficult because the thing is when you have to refactor, as you said, refactor anything that's touched, just because you're working on that story that touches balloon that story into point of view, 30 so having a short definition of done is just possible. What he says is be a professional. So be part of the what I'm supposed to be one of the things you want to be coached with certified for the developer, so be prepared to develop. So just do a small you're already cleaning up your window play, even if it's just within the whole system. Even if it's don't compete on that. So just leave it in a position. There's no it's difficult because it takes the main ones you've identified. There you go, sir. It makes sense. Okay, so it touches a lot. slow the rest of the team goes.
Some people straight out of school and they teach something that's cognitive.
So this hand thing, by the way, doesn't work when there's less than 25 people in a class. It seems to work better at Scrum conferences than other conferences. It's a self-selected group. So that's funny. Okay, so I couldn't get to all the tables, so I only picked up a couple of stompies, and I'll try and share them with you. So some people said, we need to think about risk-based refactoring. We need to do low-risk things first. That ties into the whole thing about maximizing safety.
And they said minimize impact.
Minimize impact. That's a very nice. I'll go and update the slides for the next time. So they also spoke about, some of the activities that we'll perform is like making sure that we reflect coding standards into the code base. Some of the conversation there, which I really liked, was around, just deleting all the comments. I'll probably read the comments before I delete them. But deleting all the comments and then renaming the methods to reflect what the purpose was. Comments are crap because if you code, a comment is like salt actually. There is value in it, but it should be. You shouldn't like take a pot of salt and throw it into your code. That would be terrible. It tastes like. I'm not going to swear. But we didn't really get into the workflow or the sort of like procedure that you'll follow when writing code. And maybe the question wasn't phrased perfectly. Now, J.B. Ravensburger talks about the Golden Master. You guys know what a Golden Master is? Golden Master is not the public release of Yosemite or anything like that. A Golden Master is usually in the recording industry. They create the first sort of like copy of the album that they want to produce. In the digital world, we don't really get that because the first copy is digital and it can just be replicated infinitely. And that Golden Master would then be used to create all the other copies from that point onwards. So the Golden Master is something that J.B. Ravensburger came up with, and the analogy sort of works in software terms, but it's a bit wonky. And the concept behind the Golden Master is that you create a sort of a documented understanding of what your current view of this code is. You like sort of try and characterize the behavior of the system. Michael Feathers talks about a characterization test. Now the cool thing about a characterization test is you sort of like find a way to test as much of the code that you want to start refactoring as possible, and that test sort of becomes your Golden Master. But what if you have a code base that can't be tested? Okay, so just want to share two examples with you where, you'll see what I mean, because I hear what you say. So the example was at a client, they do mass email, they like MailChimp for South Africa, so if you're using MailChimp, use them instead. The company's name is Everlytic. And they sort of do, they have these email templates that you sort of go and capture a whole bunch of stuff in. And this email templates you can do really advanced stuff, so you can even like sort of program in these templates. And they noticed that the code is really, really difficult to work with. It's been built up over the last sort of 10 years, and they got to a stage where it's impossible to work with. So they couldn't find any sort of programmatic test that they need to write. They wanted to write sort of like a cucumber test, and it was just not working. So what they did was they created this Golden Master. So they created a bunch of templates that gives them coverage in the functionality. And then they would run the sort of templates, and it would produce a mail that comes out of the system on the other end. And then they would run a little comparison on those templates. And that would tell them whether or not the thing still performs in the same way that it did. That's a nice way of explaining a Golden Master. It's sort of like, it could also be a manual test if there's no other options available. And think about generating images, that type of thing. So the Golden Master, where image generation, you may need to have a human that looks at the two images. So the Golden Master is really just giving us a first starting point from which we can refactor. And our goal with refactoring is to always try and get as many tests into this code base as possible. So the first would be the Golden Master, and as we go along, we'll try and identify the sort of little seams where we can start testing things and isolating them from one another. Seams in quite the literal sort of clothing sense, where we start putting the code apart and start pushing tests into those little seams. So I would definitely recommend that. Oh, hi Azam, welcome. Want a seat? There's a seat. So I definitely recommend that you guys attend one of the legacy code retreats. I think the Global Day of Code retreat that's coming up is going to have a legacy code retreat, and then this Golden Master concept is really put to the example or to test. So when you refactor things, you remember our goal is to always bring this thing under test as quickly as possible. And sometimes you need this Golden Master, sometimes you'll be able to write characterization tests. And you need to think about things in a risk sort of based fashion. You need to think of things that we want to do least risky things first. That could be bringing things under standards, like if you're using IntelliJ, making sure that the top right corner is green, or Ruby Storm, well, most Ruby programmers use VI, so let's look into that. Or app code if you're in Objective-C, or ReSharp if you're a .NET programmer. Just making sure that that code is sort of says green. And if you're using a standards document in your company, go and delete it and start complying to the industry-wide standards for your platform. The next is we'll start optimizing for readability. So we'll look at the code and we'll say, well, let's take Uncle Bob's clean code concepts, like 4 lines of code per method, and we start just extracting things in our understanding, deleting comments essentially, and reviewing those comments into our method names. It's still fairly risk-free. We're not changing behavior. So getting our comprehension and our intent into that code. And then we start getting into a space where things can become a little bit more precarious. So the first thing we do is we start separating concerns up. We create separate classes, pull those things a bit further away from each other. But as we're doing that, we pull things towards things that are similar. Right? So we start consolidating responsibilities. For example, there's a lot of validation stuff happening in your code. Start putting those things to the same space. I'll talk to you in a moment about one of the warnings in that, because you start seeing that, there's a lot of sort of duplication that's happening. So we're putting these things together and, oh, amazing, let's eliminate duplication. But then things could fail. So we'll get into that in about a slide. So when we're doing this, you want to make frequent and small commits. So every time you perform an action, get that into the code base. Get your builds to run, see how it sort of affects the developers around you. If you're doing continuous delivery, start seeing what the effects are in the rest of your sort of build pipeline or deployment pipeline. But frequent, small commits, incrementally, right? And we're developers, we love, start getting into this thing, and we sort of like, we change a couple of things, and we change a couple of things more, and then later on, standing there with machetes, just like swiping from left to right. You shouldn't do that, right?